The temperature drops to minus 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Your gear is soaked, your vehicle won't start, and you're 3 miles from the nearest road with darkness falling fast. In situations like this, the difference between life and death isn't your expensive sleeping bag or high-tech gear. It's whether you can build a debris hut that will keep you alive through the night using nothing but what the forest provides. The debris hut isn't just another bushcraft project. It's the most thermally efficient emergency shelter ever developed, capable of maintaining survivable temperatures in sub-zero conditions, without fire, without modern materials, and without any tools beyond your hands. In 1986, a stranded hiker in Alaska survived 3 nights at minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit using a debris hut built in under 2 hours with no tools. When built correctly, a debris hut creates a microenvironment so effective that your body heat alone can maintain life-sustaining temperatures even when the outside air is cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. The secret lies in understanding that insulation isn't about the materials, it's about trapping air. Every leaf, every pine needle, every piece of debris becomes part of a sophisticated thermal system that captures and holds the heat your body produces. The critical rule: minimum 3 feet of debris thickness for sub-zero survival, with 4 feet being optimal. Modern survival schools charge over $800 to teach these techniques, while military special forces spend weeks learning to build shelters that work when everything else fails. Tools to trust, skills that last. This is Bushcraft Arsenal. Step 1. Site selection and foundation preparation. The foundation of your survival depends on choosing the right location and preparing it properly, because even the best-built debris hut will fail if it's constructed in the wrong place or on unsuitable ground. Site selection determines whether you'll stay dry, avoid wind exposure, and have access to the materials you need to build an effective shelter. Look for a location that offers natural wind protection from trees, rocks, or terrain features, but avoid areas directly under dead trees or branches that could fall during the night. The ideal site sits on slightly elevated ground where water will naturally drain away, preventing your shelter from becoming a collection point for rain or melting snow. You want to be close enough to abundant debris materials that you won't exhaust yourself gathering insulation, but far enough from water sources to avoid the increased humidity and cold air that settles near streams and lakes. Clear the ground area where your shelter will sit, removing rocks, sticks, and any debris that could create uncomfortable pressure points or puncture holes in your insulation system. The cleared area should be just large enough for your body, plus a few inches on each side. Making the shelter larger than necessary means more space to heat and more materials required for effective insulation. Create a foundation layer using dry materials like pine boughs, bark, or even your pack if necessary to provide insulation between your body and the ground. Ground contact is one of the fastest ways to lose body heat, and this foundation layer is critical for preventing conductive heat loss that could kill you even inside an otherwise well-built shelter. The foundation should be thick enough that you can't feel the ground through it when you lie down. Test the site by lying down in your planned shelter location and checking for comfort, drainage, and wind exposure. This is your last chance to make adjustments before you commit to the construction process, and moving the shelter location after you've started building wastes precious time and energy that could mean the difference between completing your shelter before dark and spending the night exposed to deadly cold. Step 2. Ridgepole, installation and framework construction. The ridgepole forms the backbone of your debris hut and must be strong enough to support the weight of 3 to 4 feet of debris while maintaining its structural integrity throughout the night. This single piece determines whether your shelter will protect you or collapse when you need it most. Select a ridgepole that's 2 to 3 feet longer than your body height, made from dead wood that's solid and free from rot or insect damage. The pole should be thick enough that you can't easily break it with your hands, typically 3 to 4 inches in diameter for most adults. Test the strength by applying your full body weight to the middle of the pole. If it flexes significantly or shows signs of cracking, find a stronger piece. Position one end of the ridgepole on the ground where your feet will be, and elevate the other end to about 3 feet high, using a tree, rock, or forked stick as support. The angle should create a space just large enough for your body. Making it too large wastes materials and reduces thermal efficiency, while making it too small creates a cramped space that's difficult to insulate properly. Secure the elevated end of the ridgepole using whatever anchoring method your support structure allows. If using a tree, lash the pole in place with cordage, strips of bark, or even shoelaces. If using a rock or forked stick, ensure the connection is stable enough that the pole won't shift when loaded with debris. The ridgepole must remain absolutely stationary during construction and use. Collect ribbing sticks that will form the framework for holding your insulation materials. These should be straight branches about 6 to 8 feet long, placed at 12 to 18-inch intervals along both sides of the ridgepole. The ribs should extend only 1 to 2 inches beyond the ridgepole. Longer extensions will stick out and catch water, while shorter ones won't provide adequate support for the debris layer. Lean the ribbing sticks against the ridgepole at approximately 45-degree angles, creating an A-frame structure that will support the weight of your insulation materials. The ribs should touch the ground at their base and rest securely against the ridgepole at their peak, creating a stable framework that won't shift when loaded with debris. Step 3. Base layer, debris application and structural reinforcement. The base layer of debris provides the structural foundation for your insulation system and must be applied systematically to create a stable platform for the finer insulation materials that will follow. This layer determines whether your shelter will maintain its shape and effectiveness throughout the night. Begin applying debris at the foot end of the shelter, working toward the head end to ensure proper layering and overlap. Start with larger materials like branches, bark pieces, and coarse debris that will create the structural matrix for holding finer materials. These larger pieces should be woven between the ribbing sticks to create a stable base that won't slide or shift when additional materials are added. Build the base layer to approximately 12 inches thick, ensuring complete coverage with no gaps that could allow air infiltration. The materials should be layered like shingles, with each piece overlapping the one below it to shed water and prevent air movement through the debris. Pay special attention to the areas where ribbing sticks meet the ridgepole, as these junction points are common locations for air leaks. Add a second layer of medium-sized debris over the base layer, focusing on materials that will bridge the gaps in the coarser base materials. This layer should include items like smaller branches, strips of bark, and bundles of twigs that will create a more uniform surface for the fine insulation materials that follow. The goal is to eliminate air gaps while building thickness. Test the structural integrity of your base layers by gently pressing on different areas of the shelter. The debris should feel solid and stable, with no areas that compress significantly or feel loose. If you find weak spots, add more material to those areas before proceeding to the next step. The base layer must be solid enough to support the weight of the fine insulation materials without collapsing. Create a small entrance opening at the head end of the shelter, just large enough for you to crawl through. The entrance should be positioned to minimize wind exposure based on the prevailing wind direction at your site. This opening will be refined and possibly reduced in size as you complete the insulation layers, but establishing it now prevents you from having to tunnel through completed insulation later. Step 4. Fine insulation layer, application and air gap elimination. The fine insulation layer is where the thermal magic happens, creating the air-trapping matrix that will keep you alive through the night. This layer must be applied with attention to detail because gaps or thin spots will create cold zones that could prove fatal in extreme conditions. Gather fine insulation materials including leaves, pine needles, grass, moss, and any other small organic matter available in your area. The best materials are those that naturally trap air between their structures. Pine needles with their branching pattern, leaves that don't pack down tightly, and grass that maintains its hollow stem structure. Avoid materials that are wet or will compress into a solid mass when loaded. Apply the fine insulation materials in 6-inch layers, working from bottom to top and ensuring complete coverage at each level. Each layer should be applied loosely to maintain the air-trapping properties that provide thermal protection. Compacting the materials destroys their insulation value, so resist the urge to pack them down tightly. Pay special attention to potential air leak points, including the ridge line, the junction between walls and ground, and the area around the entrance. These locations are common failure points where cold air can infiltrate and destroy the thermal efficiency of your shelter. Build up extra material in these areas to ensure complete sealing. Build the fine insulation layer to meet the critical thickness requirement established earlier. Remember that materials will compress under their own weight, so build slightly thicker than the minimum to account for settling. Create a smooth, uniform outer surface that will shed water effectively. The outermost layer should consist of materials that naturally repel water, such as bark pieces, or materials that will quickly shed water rather than absorbing it. This outer shell protects the insulation layers beneath from becoming saturated and losing their thermal properties. Test the insulation thickness by pushing a stick through the debris layer at several points around the shelter. You should encounter resistance throughout the full thickness, indicating that the insulation is properly distributed and not just piled on the surface. Areas where the stick penetrates easily need additional material. Step 5. Interior insulation and sleeping system preparation. The interior of your debris hut is just as critical as the exterior walls, because this is where your body heat will be captured and held throughout the night. The interior insulation system creates a cocoon effect that maximizes the thermal efficiency of your body heat while providing comfort and protection from the structural elements of the shelter. Gather the finest insulation materials available for interior use, prioritizing materials that are dry, soft, and have excellent air-trapping properties. Pine boughs with needles still attached are ideal because they create multiple air layers while remaining relatively comfortable to lie on. Cattail leaves, if available, are exceptional because their cellular structure naturally traps air. Fine grass, moss, and even milkweed down can be used to create a sophisticated interior insulation system. Stuff the interior space completely full of insulation materials, creating a nest-like environment that you'll burrow into when you enter the shelter. This may seem counterintuitive, filling the space you plan to occupy, but the principle is that you'll compress the materials with your body weight, creating a custom-fitted insulation system that conforms to your body shape while maintaining air pockets around you. Create layers of different materials inside the shelter, with the coarsest materials like pine boughs forming the base layer against the shelter floor, medium materials like leaves and grass forming the middle layer, and the finest materials like cattail down or milkweed seeds forming the top layer that will be in direct contact with your body. This layered approach maximizes comfort while optimizing thermal protection. Pay special attention to insulating the area where your head will rest, as significant heat loss occurs through the head and neck area. Create a thick pillow of fine insulation materials that will cradle your head while preventing heat loss to the ground or shelter structure. This head insulation area should be at least 8 inches thick and composed of the softest materials available. Prepare additional loose insulation materials that you can pull over yourself once inside the shelter, creating a blanket effect that adds another layer of thermal protection. These materials should be kept dry and easily accessible from your sleeping position, allowing you to adjust your insulation level based on conditions throughout the night. Test the interior system by crawling into the shelter and positioning yourself in your planned sleeping position. The insulation should surround you completely without creating uncomfortable pressure points or leaving gaps where cold air could reach your body. Adjust the materials as needed to create a comfortable, thermally efficient sleeping environment. Step 6. Entrance design and ventilation management. The entrance to your debris hut represents the greatest potential for heat loss and must be carefully designed to minimize thermal compromise while allowing necessary access and ventilation. This critical component can make the difference between a shelter that maintains life-sustaining temperatures and one that fails when you need it most. Size the entrance opening to be just large enough for you to crawl through comfortably while wearing whatever clothing you have. A larger opening makes entry easier, but creates a massive heat loss point that will compromise the thermal efficiency of your entire shelter. The opening should be positioned at the head end of the shelter and oriented away from the prevailing wind direction to minimize cold air infiltration. Create an entrance plug using a bundle of insulation materials that can be pulled into place behind you once you're inside the shelter. This plug should fit snugly in the entrance opening and be thick enough to provide the same level of insulation as the walls of your shelter. The plug material should be easily movable from inside the shelter in case you need to exit quickly. Design a simple ventilation system that prevents carbon dioxide buildup while minimizing heat loss. This can be as simple as leaving a small gap at the top of the entrance or creating a tiny opening near the ridge pole that allows air exchange without creating a significant heat loss point. Proper ventilation prevents condensation buildup that could soak your insulation materials and destroy their thermal properties. Consider creating a cold trap entrance design if time and materials allow. This involves building a short tunnel or baffle system that forces cold air to change direction before entering the main shelter space, allowing the heavier cold air to settle in the entrance area while warmer air remains in the sleeping area. This advanced technique significantly improves thermal efficiency but requires additional construction time. Prepare emergency exit procedures and ensure that you can quickly remove the entrance plug and exit the shelter if necessary. Practice this process before settling in for the night, as emergency evacuation in darkness and cold conditions can be disorienting and dangerous. Your entrance design must balance thermal efficiency with safety requirements. Test the entrance system by entering and exiting the shelter several times, adjusting the plug fit and ventilation as needed. The entrance should seal effectively when closed, but allow quick access when needed. Make any necessary adjustments before committing to spending the night in the shelter. Step 7. Final inspection, testing, and thermal optimization. The final inspection and testing phase ensures that your debris hut will perform when your life depends on it, identifying and correcting any weaknesses before you commit to spending the night in sub-zero conditions. This systematic evaluation process can reveal problems that aren't apparent during construction, but could prove fatal during actual use. Conduct a comprehensive structural inspection by walking around the entire shelter and checking for gaps, thin spots, or areas where the insulation appears inadequate. Look for places where the underlying framework is visible through the debris, as these represent potential thermal bridges that will conduct heat away from your body. Add additional insulation to any areas that don't meet the minimum 3-foot thickness requirement. Test the structural integrity by gently applying pressure to different areas of the shelter walls and roof. The structure should feel solid and stable, with no areas that compress significantly or feel loose. Pay particular attention to the ridge-pole connection and the areas where ribbing sticks bear the most load. Any structural weakness discovered now can be corrected, but failure during the night could be catastrophic. Perform a thermal test by entering the shelter and sealing the entrance, then monitoring how quickly the interior temperature begins to rise from your body heat. In a properly constructed debris hut, you should notice a temperature increase within 15 to 20 minutes of sealing yourself inside. If the temperature doesn't rise, you have air leaks or insufficient insulation that must be corrected. Check the entrance system thoroughly by practicing entry and exit procedures multiple times. The entrance plug should fit snugly without gaps, but should be removable quickly if emergency evacuation becomes necessary. Ensure that you can operate the entrance system in complete darkness, as you may need to exit the shelter during the night. Verify that your ventilation system is working properly by checking for air movement without creating significant heat loss. The ventilation should be barely perceptible but sufficient to prevent carbon dioxide buildup and condensation problems. Adjust the ventilation openings as needed to achieve the proper balance. Prepare your interior sleeping system by arranging all insulation materials for maximum thermal efficiency and comfort. Everything should be positioned so that you can settle into your sleeping position without disturbing the carefully constructed insulation layers. Have additional loose materials readily available for pulling over yourself once you're positioned for the night. Modern survival instructors who teach debris, hut construction in military CR programs emphasize that the final inspection phase is where most shelter failures are prevented. In 2003, a downed pilot in northern Canada survived 4 days at -30 degrees Fahrenheit, using these exact inspection protocols to ensure his debris hut maintained thermal integrity. Emergency responders who have used these techniques in real survival situations report that the time spent on thorough final testing often makes the difference between a shelter that saves your life and one that fails when you need it most. The debris hut you've constructed represents thousands of years of human survival knowledge refined into a shelter system that can keep you alive in conditions that would otherwise be fatal. When built according to these specifications and tested thoroughly, your shelter will maintain survivable temperatures using only your body heat, even in sub-zero conditions that would kill an unprotected person in minutes. Let me know in the comments which step of debris hut construction surprised you most. Was it the massive amount of insulation required or the critical importance of interior stuffing? See you in the next episode.